a little bit more caffeine. You spent a lot of the first hour listening to some really incredible insights from young change makers, which I really appreciated, all the variety of insights. Now we are going to be passing the ball back over to each of you at your tables to help us think through one of the big priorities for USAID. And this is a great opportunity, I think, as a collective community. How do we help advance the work of a lot of our missions that, as you know, over the past 2 years during this transition, we've done a pause on country strategies. And that's allowed Administrator Green and a lot of the new administration to bring in some of the new kind of focus that we have on private sector engagement, as well as on this concept of the journey to self-reliance that Lauren is going to give us a little bit more of an overview on in just a minute. What we're hoping for is during these next 45 minutes that at your tables, and you should find in your packet two sheets of paper stapled together that says the journey to self-reliance for youth. So you'll want to have that out, and at the middle of each table is a note sheet with the 3 questions that at least one of you at the table will take those notes and pass into us at the end. But basically, many of you have been tracking trends in our field in general, as well as at USAID as we've gone through the transition. And, you know, Administrator Green has a long commitment, as Michelle said, to young people, whether it was his time with his wife as a teacher in Kenya or helping oversee the creation of Generation Democracy at IRI, or his commitment through USAID over the past year and a half. But one of the things that he really has as a strong part of his vision is how do we change and end foreign assistance as we currently know it? And what does it take to build the commitment and the capacity of countries that we partner with to really change the way they invest in social and economic policies that give better outcomes in the long term, not only for youth, but for the entire society there. So Lauren's going to talk us through briefly, what do we mean when USAID talks about the journey of self-reliance? I'm going to give you just a snapshot on how some of our missions are looking at this in terms of what's the role of young people as they develop these country strategies to talk about this, because this is a core section of our country strategies. Then we want you to talk about, well, what does that look like in countries of high self-reliance or low self-reliance on metrics that impact young people and how we engage them? Because we want to take what you come up with and we want to condense that and share that out with more of our missions as they go through this important next year of developing new CDCSs. So, Lauren?
Okay. Great. Thank you, Mike. And thanks to all of you guys, to the organizers, the really inspiring youth, and for all of you and your hard work that you do. So, as Mike was mentioning, we've been going through a reorienting period for USAID of our development vision and mission, working to support partner country self-reliance. So what is self-reliance? What are we talking about when we use this phrase and these concepts? First of all, this is the definition up here. USAID defines self-reliance as the country's ability to plan, finance, and implement solutions aimed at addressing their own development challenges. It's also important to clarify what we mean when we say a country. So a country is not just the government, it's considering all the constituent elements, so various actors at various scales, which would include the government, but also civil society, the private sector, and of course, youth, especially in contexts where youth are the majority population. We focus on 2 mutually reinforcing factors which determine a country's ability to plan, finance, and implement development solutions. So one is commitment. That's the degree to which a country's laws, policies, actions, and informal governance mechanisms, including cultures and norms, support progress towards self-reliance. We also pay attention to capacity, existing capacity, so how far a country has already come in its ability to finance and manage development across various dimensions, political, social, and economic, including the ability to work across these different sectors. And the theory of change is that as a country increases its commitment and capacity to plan, finance, and manage its own development, its level of self-reliance should also increase. So to better understand where each of our partner countries are in their journeys, the agency has developed and released 17 self-reliance metrics to measure core aspects of commitment and capacity. On the commitment side, you can start seeing here, we have looked at indicators that measure a country's commitment to open and accountable government. So this includes aspects of liberal democracy, things like freedom of association, expression, rule of law. Also, in terms of open government, the ways in which governments foster citizenship participation and decision-making. We've paid a lot of attention to inclusive development. This includes social group equality as well as gender equality, and then sound economic policy choices. On the capacity side, we look for indicators that assess a country's overall level of capacity across government, so aspects of government effectiveness, citizen safety and security, and so on, as well as civil society. This might include the capacity of civil society organizations or the media to use, to hold the government accountable, for example. We also look at capacity of the citizenry, so that considers elements of education, of health and poverty levels, as well as the economy. The selection of these particular metrics reflects a belief that these elements constitute the prerequisites for a robust development pathway. As countries become more self-reliant in these aspects of capacity and commitment, they should be able to attain and sustain greater and more inclusive peace, prosperity, freedom, and resilience. So, in the coming months, we will be releasing self-reliance country roadmaps for all low and middle income countries. These country roadmaps are USAID's visualization tool for showing at a very high level where all the countries are in their journeys to self-reliance, both individually and relative to the rest of the world, as well as each country's relative strengths and challenges along these different self-reliance metrics. The metrics and roadmaps will be used in our strategic planning processes for new country development cooperation strategies, the CDCSs, as well as in our development dialogues with countries and development partners. USAID's vision for supporting partner country self-reliance marks a shift in the agency toward meeting each country where it is in its development journey and targeting our assistance based on each individual country's self-reliance needs rather than focusing more predominantly on addressing global development challenges. In addition to using a country-focused approach, we're also envisioning that an emphasis on supporting countries' journey to self-reliance will entail some other operational shifts. One is an increased emphasis on effective partnerships with a range of actors who share our vision and values, and in particular with whom we think we can work together to move the needle to realize sustained impact. USAID aims to harness the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship of private sector enterprise and a diverse partner base, seeking new forms of collaboration and partnership to achieve greater development impacts. Another shift is increased attention to systems strengthening, which will help with longer-term sustainability, resilience, and ultimately self-reliance. I'm going to now hand it off to Mike, who will dig down on how youth are critical players in planning and implementing solutions to development challenges. Throughout the rest of our discussions, I encourage you to think not only conceptually about the role of youth in the journey to self-reliance, but also about the concrete opportunities to elevate youth during upcoming bursts of strategic planning and development dialogues, as well as the anticipated operational shifts that I was alluding to that are going to be accompanying our shifting strategic approach, such as the expanded partnerships and increased attention to systems and sustainability. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. So as Lauren was saying, this is going to be a key part of our dialogue that's going on over the next year or two in every one of our missions as they develop their new country strategies. And so we need to think, what is that relevance? How does it tie in terms of capacity and commitment at an institutional level, which is what a lot of these indicators will look at. But there's also the opportunity to say, what's the role that self-reliance plays with young people in terms of how their own behavior change can be affecting transformation of self-reliance at the individual level, the family, the community, or that institutional level, not only on issues such as education, health, and livelihoods, but also taking a look at emerging leaders and how we can build a culture of self-reliance by really investing, as some of the young people were mentioning a little bit earlier, in those opportunities for them to take action on this. So interestingly, on these metrics, they're not age disaggregated. So when you think about the social group equality one, it isn't age disaggregated yet. We've asked them to see if they could age disaggregate on that because we do want metrics that will measure this. So there are ways that we can be thinking of other complementary metrics that a country mission or a country set of partners can look at. For example, in commitment on open and accountable governance, what's going on with high voter turnout or registration by young people, or the level of representation in political positions. We know that worldwide only about 6% of political representatives are under age 35, despite being about 60 to 65% of the population. Same in terms of government capacity, the level of trust in governance systems or levels of violence against or by youth or the levels of unemployment are all ways that we can look at issues that may be affecting them as we look at metrics and strengthening of systems and institutions. But what we want to challenge all of you to do in the next 30 minutes is to have a discussion at your table about what does it look like to be in what might be on one of those roadmaps, a low self-reliance country that's very dependent on aid, that may not have a lot of strong institutional systems set up, versus a country that may be much stronger along that line. And what does that look like in terms of the interventions that our partners, government, implementing partners or others, would propose in those cases? And then how do we convey that back to governments, our missions, your partners in the field, to say, as you design this strategy, as you design new projects, how are you really effectively engaging, bringing positive youth development principles in, bringing this concept of how we measure that, what are those differences that we need to look at? So at your table, we ask you to do 3 things in the next 30 minutes. 1, assign one person to grab that sheet of paper that has these 3 questions that will take down general key takeaways that you may have. 2, that you facilitate this discussion and try and balance it over the next 30 minutes on these 3 questions of, are there differences in how we invest in youth based on their self-reliance? What roles can youth play in that journey to self-reliance? And how do we strengthen that role in low versus high self-reliance countries? And what do partners and USAID need to do to support systems to support self-reliance? So those 3 questions. You'll see in your folder, you should have all gotten when you came in. Some people do not have it. If you, it was handed to you as you got your folder. Something that says Journey to Self-Reliance for Youth. If you don't, we have extra copies. Just raise your hand and we'll pass those out. And what we ask you to do is on the very last page, you'll see some of those metrics, and it has a space for what would you do in a low self-reliant country versus a high self-reliant country. Let's say a Nicaragua versus Armenia right now. And so it's another way that you could think about what's the difference in how we design programming related to that. So again, you have about 30 minutes at the end. We do ask that you have the person who's the scribe for your takeaway points just to share them. We won't do a giant share out, but we will take your input. We'll synthesize it. We will share that out eventually through YouthPower Learning, but we'll also share it with our missions. So I thank you in advance for your contribution to helping our missions think more about this. And let me just close with one last thing. As one of the gentlemen who's passing it out here, when we were stapling at the beginning before everyone got here, and he touched exactly on why we need to include the youth in the journey of self-reliance. I asked him what he's working on. He said, I'm looking at applications of blockchain to community development. I said, exactly. I'm going to guess that about half the people in the room today won't know what the heck blockchain is. They know the term but don't know what it is. That's why we have young people as part of this journey of self-reliance, because they're using new technologies and new approaches to get better outcomes in partnership with us. So enjoy your discussion for the next 30 minutes. Thanks.